Okay, so good morning again. We are here on Tuesday to talk about the future of estate planning and after-tax investment accounts. I'm Rachel, this is Quentin. We're matching and very festive today. So with that, let's get started.
All right, so just to get started here, we wanted to break down for you kind of what we're going to be talking about. There's been a lot of noise around, tax changes, and some of those changes are related to estate planning and your non-qualified, your after-tax money. So just to kind of show you what the situation is today, what the numbers are currently. We're at 11.58 million in an estate tax exemption per individual. So it's about 23 million for a married couple household. That's the exemption amount, meaning that anything over that dollar amount is then taxed, and the highest marginal tax rate for the estate tax right now is 40%. So what was proposed by Biden and his cohorts was that, we go back to the original 5 million, or even we've seen going back all the way to 2009, the 3.5 million in a state tax exemption per individual. So that's either 10 million or 7 for a married couple. And then there was also talk of raising the marginal tax bracket of 40% to 45%. So anything over that 5 million or that 10 million number would be taxed, with the highest marginal bracket being at 45%. There was other changes, thoughts, about cost basis and getting rid of that. We'll touch on that a little later down the road here. But for our after-tax money, currently the highest marginal tax bracket is 20%. And it was proposed that for households with an income, a taxable income over $1 million, that we increase that tax rate to 39.6. So that would only impact you if you were at 1 million. Now, you might be thinking, well, okay, my estate isn't at that 11.58 million, so this doesn't really apply to me. My income here is not $1 million, so it doesn't really impact me. We do have some key things that, estate planning is more than just those exemption amounts that we want to go over. So there's a lot more information that might apply to you that's outside of the purview of just the exemption and tax rate amounts.
Got it. All right. And so these tax law changes, they're dependent on the makeup of the Senate. So right now what we have is the Republicans hold 50 seats, the Democrats hold 46, and then there are 2 seats that are held by independents, one of them being Bernie Sanders. And then we have 2 seats remaining that are going to be decided in Georgia's runoff election, which is happening in January. There's been a lot of talk that a Republican is going to win at least 1 seat in Georgia. If that happens to be the case, then the Republicans remain the majority in the Senate with 51 seats. So a lot of these tax law changes that the Biden president cohort might want to produce, well, they're not going to have a really strong positive feedback in the Senate. So they might not really get introduced. Now, if it went the other way and the 2 seats went Democratic in Georgia, well, then we might see a few things come up for a vote. And if it came up for a vote, well, and we had a tie of 50-50, then Kamala Harris, the vice president, would come in and break the tie. And we kind of have a good idea of how she would vote. But again, one other thing to remember is that there are a few moderates that are Democrats in the Senate currently. So one's in West Virginia and another is in Montana. And it's also been talked that they probably won't be voting for some of these policies because they don't want to see such a far left tax policy come into place. So what's likely to happen? We're likely just to remain the status quo. And that's in terms of our estate tax exemption amount, likely just to remain at 11.58 million per individual. The capital gains tax rate will likely just remain at 20%. and we won't see that increase to people who make over $1 million more in annual income. So those are some positive things if that is you. And then what we'll see, and this was, as Quentin had mentioned earlier, about the step up in basis, and Biden had kind of talked about maybe the elimination of step up in basis. And for those of you who may not be familiar with it, the step up in basis is, you inherit an asset, and let's say it's $100. Well, your family member, they purchased it for $50. But when you inherit it, you inherit that stepped up value of $100. So that's helpful for you, because if you go around and sell it, you're not paying the capital gains tax on that asset that you inherited. So it's not a favorable policy to eliminate for a lot of people, and especially the policymakers, because they are likely to be inheriting assets as well, and that really has a negative impact on how much you could receive. So. Why would it change?
So there's two reasons why we see that there could be some changes here. And one of them goes back to when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed, and Trump got that through. The only way they could do it was by not making it permanent. So what they did is they put in that sunset provision for 2025. Basically, the tax changes that they proposed, they got through in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, couldn't be permanent. They would only last for as long as Trump really was in office, if he had won the second term. So, if nothing happens between now and 2025, at least at that point, we would see changes to our standard deduction. So, in California, for example, right now we're capped at that $10,000, and nationwide, federally, we're capped at that $10,000 deduction for state and local taxes. Well, a lot of us in California, with the property taxes and the income taxes being as high as they are capped at that 10, can't get the full deduction on that amount, but that would sunset in 2025. The exemption amount for the estate tax is one of those other things that would revert back. So we'd go from the 11.5 million back to the 5 million. So there's those changes that were made that are still in place, that if nothing happened between now and then, would then revert back, and that would happen in 2025. The other thing that's going on right now is we have this little thing called the coronavirus, and Biden and the Democrats are very focused on getting this under control. We've seen, the first 100 days you have to wear a mask. They're focusing on things in the stimulus, relief packages. That's their focus right now. Their focus really isn't increasing taxes or, trying to make changes to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act at this point. Once we see that the impact of the coronavirus is lessening on the economy, and we maybe have a vaccine, people are starting to be able to eat at restaurants again, we're able to get on an airplane and fly around the world wherever we want to go, then at that point, the economy is taking off a little bit more. We're likely then to maybe see them try to start bringing in some of these changes that relate to taxes. But at this point, they'd probably rather focus on getting that stimulus out there, focus on getting that relief out there, and let the economy rebuild itself rather than try to impose some things at this point.
So, as we promised, let's talk about some suggested strategies for your estate plan and after-tax accounts.
All right. So when it comes to your estate plan, as I mentioned, a lot of the changes or proposals may not impact you if your estate is not at those exemption amounts. But you know what? No matter what situation you're in, we always advise that you meet with your financial advisor, go over your financial plan, and look for, hey, am I going to be over that amount? Whether it be the 11.58 million or that 5 million in the estate tax exemption. And then once you've determined, yeah, we are going to be over that amount, maybe you come up with some strategies on how to reduce the potential tax liability that your estate would have come that point. And one of those strategies really is gifting. You can do gifting in different ways. There's gifting today using your annual exclusion amount, the $15,000 or $30,000 per married couple. You can gift it to, you know, whoever it may be, friends, family, kids, grandchildren, and that, you know, if you do that consistently, lowers your estate value, and, you know, starts gifting and getting it out earlier on. The other option is to give to charity. You can give your required minimum distributions, your RMDs from your IRA every year, to charity directly, reducing your taxable income. That would help. The other option is, you know, with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, with the deductions and our standard deduction, you know, it's really hard to get more than that standard deduction. The only way to do it really is to be extra charitable, or maybe have a lot of high medical expenses. That part we don't want. Let's be more charitable. We can say, hey, every year I give $5,000 to this charity or this church. You could say, hey, instead of doing the $5,000 this year, I'm going to hold on to that $5,000, put it to the side, save another $5,000 next year. And in the year 3, I'm going to give $15,000. So that helps bring me up so that I can deduct more on my taxes. So it does two things. Helps you today with your taxes, especially, you know, if you're trying to get over that standard deduction. And then it allows you to be charitable and also reduce your estate, so that, you know, maybe you're out of those exemption amounts later on.
Yeah, and just so you guys know, this year with the CARES Act they passed, you can take a $300 above line deduction on your tax return for charitable donation. So, I mean, now it's been, you really couldn't put those on your tax return and get the deduction because of the standard deduction, but they did allow for $300 to at least be above the line. So that's an opportunity. But
estate planning is, like I said, you know, this might not apply to you. It's more than just looking at those exemption amounts and determining whether or not you're going to be over them. You know, anyone can review their financial plan and look for things like, hey, are my beneficiaries on my IRAs listed correctly? Are the individuals that I want listed? Make sure you don't have your trust listed as beneficiary on your IRA. That's important to make sure that those assets go directly to your heirs rather than passing through the trust. It's better tax-wise to do that. The other thing is making sure that your estate plan has your power of attorneys in place for health and financial directives. You know, making sure that your home is owned by the trust, not you as an individual. And you do all of these things to avoid probate, because you know what? You might not be in the exemption amount, or you might be under that exemption amount, but you could be over the probate amount for your state. So, you know, if your assets are over a certain dollar amount, you know, they're subject to probate, and your house could be one of those items. And then when it goes to probate, it's expensive, it's time consuming, and it takes longer for your heirs to get, you know, for the money and the assets to go where they need it to go. So it's really important, no matter what situation you're in, to really evaluate your estate plan and make sure you've dotted all those I's, crossed all those T's, and thinking about the future. And it's not for you, it's for your kids and grandkids and whatnot. So I definitely encourage that. That's a discussion you have when you look at your plan.
All right, and now after-tax accounts. So before we get into this, you know, one thing you need to decide and figure out is, are you that person that's going to have an income over $1 million? If that's you, then okay, let's talk. Let's review your financial plan, and then let's look at how would realizing these gains impact your plan, and then decide if it's worth it. So when we go off and we decide to realize some capital gains, and this had been kind of talked about before Biden got elected, people are like, oh, if this is going to go into policy, well, should I be realizing gains now? And again, that goes for people who have an income over $1 million, and that's not really a lot of us. It could be some of your friends or your family, so this would be something to share with them. But again, let's review your financial plan, and if we decide it's worth it, what we have to know is, okay, we're taking a pretty big tax hit today. So it's 20% federal capital gains tax rate. And then if you live in California, it's an additional 14%, because California treats capital gains as ordinary income tax. So if you were to take all these gains and then decide to reinvest it pretty, right afterwards, well, you've significantly reduced your capital in order to do so. So by doing that, you're affecting the assets that you have in the near term, because we've realized the gain, we have less capital moving forward. If this is something you wanted to do, we plug it into a plan and see, okay, does this make sense? But again, really, you shouldn't be making these decisions on a tax law that's speculative. We don't know if this is going to happen. Really, it's not going to happen until, I think, again, as we've talked about, like, the government really cares about a stimulus bill for the coronavirus. That is their main concern. So if we were to start seeing changes for the estate tax or the capital gains tax, it's not likely going to be until the end of 2021 or 2022 when this conversation really might start to come to fruition. And again, it goes back to the Senate. So if the Republicans remain majority, the Democrats are going to have to make some compromises in order to get some of these tax bills passed, because the Republicans aren't going to be going after this pretty. They're not going to be willing to just do this. So there's going to be a lot more negotiations. So at this point in time, I think, remain everything as it is, unless you have a purchase you want to do in the near term or something comes up. Then yeah, reach out to your advisor and let's talk and figure out if we need to make some changes this year. And one thing I will mention is, I think with Biden coming in, everybody was getting really worried about taxes. And I think there was a lot of noise out there that was going to affect a lot of people. But particularly with estate planning and capital gains, it doesn't really affect the majority of Americans. And again, it goes back to, if this is going to affect you, well, then let's have a conversation. But it's not going to be that soon. So part of our thing here today was, okay, let's give you guys some clarity on what is actually coming to the table. And then also what's been great about this whole thing is it's gotten people to start thinking about it. So like now it's like, go home, think about your estate plan. Make sure, like Quentin said, those beneficiaries are as they are. So let's just sum it up for everybody.
All right. So to sum it up real quick, it's likely we're going to have a split Congress, which makes it really difficult for some of these, any laws really, to be passed through, whether it's taxes or other situations. That is one of the better situations actually in a government and how it relates maybe to your portfolio when it's invested. I know it doesn't maybe sound like a great place to be. We'd rather maybe be all in one way or the other. But really, the best deals I always say are those where both parties leave unhappy. So when you go to sell it, you probably have an experience. You sold a car, you probably felt like, the person bought it, stole it from you, and they probably felt like they got robbed buying it from you. Those are the best situations to be in. Right now, the coronavirus and an economic recovery is the primary goal at this point, before they even put, any sort of tax-related changes on the table to be discussed. So once we start to see that, get better vaccines out there, those kinds of things, then at that point, maybe we'll have a more clear picture of what is to come. And then at that point is when we would want to go ahead and start making decisions, whether it be, do we gift more at this point? Do we realize some of those gains, especially if we know that we have a bigger purchase coming up relatively soon? We may want to consider that. And then regardless of what happens, review your estate plan, review your financial plan, make sure everything is up to date. Make sure those that you want in your estate plan are listed there. Make sure your power of attorneys, everything is up to date. That's really important that we take care of that now, no matter what your situation is.
Yeah.
All right. So at that point, questions.
Yeah. Any questions, Steve?
Yes. The first question that came through was that over the last few years, estate lawyers have recommended that you convert from an irrevocable trust to a revocable living trust. With the possible tax law changes, should we revert back to going into irrevocable trusts as opposed to the revocable trust? So, and this also states it depends on if your estate is over 5 to 10 million.
Yeah, so the revocable trust gives you more flexibility so that you can basically basically, when something happens that causes a reason to go look at the trust, the death of one of the spouses or something like that, you can kind of look around, assess what the situation is, and then make decisions from there. So it's still encouraged that we, have revocable trust rather than irrevocable trust, just so that, laws are changing. I mean, we've seen them change frequently here. You can then at that point make decisions based off of this current situation. So we would still encourage the revocable trust.
And one other question we got was that I've heard, and I think Quentin mentioned it, but I've heard that you can save taxes today by giving money to my children. Is that true? And can you explain why or why not?
Yes. So by giving money today, you're not actually going to save on your taxes. You don't get to, reduce any kind of income by that gift, unfortunately. Basically, the exemption amount is, the annual exemption amount just allows you to gift a certain portion of your income without it really being taxable to the person who's receiving it. So you cannot save on your taxes at this point by doing so. The only way to save in a gifting strategy is to, gift to charities and those kinds of things.
And that's on your ordinary income tax.
Yeah, your ordinary income tax. And really, the gifting today is done to reduce your estate so that you're under the exemption amount in the future. It doesn't really, benefit you necessarily today in any kind of tax standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's forward looking. So if you had if it went down to 5 million and then you had 100,000 extra or beyond that 5 million, that's going to be taxable, and so that's reducing the amount, and it's already money that's been taxed. So the whole idea, I think, going forward and thinking about these strategies and reviewing, and that's something we can do when we plug into the plan. We can really look at, okay, how much are you likely to leave to your heirs? And if you are above that amount, well, then we can even look at how much of the tax hit will be on that estate. So those are things like for gifting, you're not really saving money today in terms of gifting to children at least, or family members in terms of ordinary income tax, but you are going to reduce the tax liability down the road. So I think that's a common misconception people about gifting, but you can always give to charity, and that's what will help with your current income today, income tax.
We had one last question just come in, and it's asking, is it 5 million for joint?
No, it's 5 million per individual, so it'd be a 10 million exemption for a household married couple.
That's all we have.
All right.
Let's see the poll.
All right.
Let's go to the polls.
What did you think the highest capital gains tax rate in the U.S. history was? So today it's 20, and let's see. Oh, you should be able to direct people submitting.
They are. Got a few coming through now.
Okay,
Give it a few
Steve's coming in with results.
here. Just want to give it a little bit of time to let everybody go.
Thanks for your patience. Technology, it's fun. But while we wait for those, just a reminder for everybody. So tomorrow we have the elephant deficit in the room. That's going to be at 11 a.m. and that is with Steve and Igor. On Thursday, we have investment strategies that could perform well under a Biden presidency. And then on Friday is Good News Friday, where we're just talking about good news, nothing political or even economic. So that'll be fun. And if you miss this or you want to share it with someone that you know would find valuable information for them, again, the recordings will be available on our website. You'll get an email to let you know. And it's been fun. Okay, so people thought 40. The answer is actually 35. And that happened in 1941 as it got reduced. I think it was, So it was actually 35 was the highest capital gains rate. And
all right, so then in 2019, the U.S. had $3.5 trillion in tax revenue. So what percentage of that was made up from estate taxes? And there we go. All right. So looks like most people thought it was 10%. It's actually 0.45%. So it's a very small amount what estate taxes make up of, the total tax revenue for the country.
Yeah, and if you tuned in on Monday, I mean, California, for example, like most of our tax revenue comes from capital gains. Yeah. And I don't know if that has to do, we do have a lot of tech companies here that pay mostly in stock. So it's when they go into
realize they're restricted units, or they're restricted stock, that they have to pay capital gains on that.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. We hope to see you the rest of the week. And happy holidays.